I didn't learn about my son's wedding from an invitation or a phone call filled with happy details. I learned about it while standing in my own living room, asking an innocent question and watching my daughter in law lounge on the sofa I bought. "We already married yesterday. Only special people were invited," she said, and the words landed like frost inside my chest. I kept my face still, but in that instant I saw the pale dress I'd chosen for myself droop in the closet, the new shoes that pinched just a little, the $1,000 I'd set aside as a gift, the house I had scrubbed for guests who would never arrive. I had covered their rent for 3 years, stocked their refrigerator on weeks when paychecks apparently evaporated, paid for rings and personal expenses, and somehow I was not special? Later, alone at my kitchen table, I made coffee and opened my bank file in a ritual I had always performed for them and never for me. I added the rent, 500 times 36, then groceries, holidays, a clinic visit, the car note, the air conditioner repair, the sofa itself. The number built like a storm and finally settled on a figure that made my jaw ache. 33,400. I pressed the pen tip into the page until it dotted through. That night I did not cry for long. I let the first tears wash the salt of humiliation away, and then I breathed, slow and deliberate, as if teaching my lungs a new rhythm. When my phone vibrated the next morning, I already knew the tone I would hear: urgent sweetness, soft edges, a plea disguised as love. "The rent is overdue," she said, voice trembling. "The landlord says—" I stopped stirring my coffee. "I warned you," I answered, surprised by how even my voice sounded. "I help special people." Silence rolled over the line, and in it I heard my own heartbeat, steady as a metronome. I imagined the photos I'd seen online, her parents around the couple, champagne and grins, and I felt something click into place behind my ribs, like a lock turning. I dressed, put on the earrings my late husband once praised, and walked to the bank. The manager, who had watched my account leak into theirs month after month, greeted me with a kindness that felt like permission. "Cancel every transfer," I said. "Remove every access. Add alerts. Print confirmations." He did not question my sanity. He congratulated my decision the way one congratulates a patient who finally completes a difficult treatment. Outside, the air seemed louder and cleaner, as if the city had shed a layer of dust. I turned my phone off and went for a walk with no errand attached. No pharmacy pickups, no extra groceries for their just in case, no detours to their apartment. At the park, I watched a boy feed ducks and remembered Adrian at 5, cheeks round, eyes bright, declaring me the best mom in the universe. I let that memory be true and let it end there. I refused to drag it forward to excuse what I endured now. Back home, I opened windows, changed the sheets, and called a locksmith. Security felt like love I could give myself. I made another pot of coffee and sat at the same table that had once held birthday cakes and rent envelopes and my quiet tears. I wrote a list titled "Things That Belong to Me." My mornings, my bank card, my front door, my peace, my future. Each line steadied me. The word mother did not vanish, but it moved, finally, to a place where it could not be rented by the month. When my son's text flashed across the screen, "Mom, please answer, we need to talk," I let the message dissolve into the background hum of the kettle. For years, I had confused love with subsidy, affection with invoices paid on time. Now the confusion was clearing like fog burned off by noon sun. By dusk, I felt taller somehow, even in flats. I placed my unused wedding outfit back in its garment bag without ceremony, not as a shrine to rejection, but as proof that I still owned beautiful things, and the right to wear them for myself, on a night I might choose, to celebrate nothing more complicated than my ability to say no. When I came back from my walk and the small ceremony of canceling transfers, the first thing I noticed was the angle of the curtains in my front window, tilted, as if someone had looked out and then pretended nothing had shifted. The second thing was the hush inside my house, that charged, wrong quiet that follows a trespass. My keys scraped the new deadbolt I'd had set aside for installation, and when the door swung open, I found my son seated on my sofa with his head bowed like a penitent, and Sophia prowling the rug I had chosen, while a gray-suited man stood at my table. My papers fanned before him like a hand of cards. "Mom," Adrian began, voice soft in a way that used to undo me, "you've been off. We're worried." The lawyer introduced himself, something polished that slid out of memory as soon as it was spoken, and explained they had options to ensure my safety. He held out a folder, temporary authority for Adrian to assist with my finances. I didn't take it. I walked to the table and stacked my documents with deliberate care, ownership returning to my hands in a motion as simple as gathering pages. "Those are my private records," I said, and my voice surprised me with how even it was, how it threaded through the room without strain. Sophia shifted into her gentle persona, the one she wears like a silk scarf whenever money is in the air. "Miriam, loneliness at your age can feel like confusion. Let us take this burden." At my age, like a small knife hidden in a compliment. I told them to leave. The lawyer kept speaking in therapeutic phrases: transition plan, continuity of care, temporary power, follow-up evaluation, as if the words themselves would hypnotize me into compliance. It dawned on me then that this wasn't a family visit. It was an ambush engineered to end with my signature. I opened the folder, glanced at the blank where my name would seed my life, and dropped the packet gently into the kitchen trash. For a moment, no one moved. I could hear the clock tick, the refrigerator hum, my own breath discreet and steady. Then Adrian stood, cheeks hot. "You can't cut us off overnight. We have obligations." "So do I," answered, to myself. He looked past me to the lawyer, and I felt the last thread that tethered us fray. A son who consults counsel to access his mother's wallet is not a son seeking reconciliation. I picked up my phone and called Attorney Weber, the man who had shepherded my husband's will years ago. He answered on the second ring, listened, and said 3 sentences that threaded steel into my spine. "You were right to refuse. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't sign anything." I ended the call and asked them again to leave. The lawyer gathered his briefcase with the economy of a man used to losing on phase 1. Sophia let a few careful tears fall, and Adrian muttered something about me being unwell. When the door shut, the house exhaled. I locked it, slid the chain, and felt a boundary set like concrete. In the mirror by the entry, my face was pale but unshaking. I made tea and stood at the sink, hands warm around the mug, thinking of how many Saturdays I had sacrificed to errands for them, bank lines, pharmacy counters, grocery aisles, and how none of that labor had purchased simple respect. By the time Weber stepped over my threshold, I had made a list. Change locks today, install cameras tomorrow, open a new account at a different bank, freeze credit, document everything. He approved each item, added 2 more, update the will, preemptive letter to local agencies in case of weaponized welfare checks, and promised to file a no trespass notice by morning. "Miriam, this is a textbook escalation. You're not overreacting. You are drawing a clean line." After he left, I called a locksmith and a security company. Both knew my name from years of arranging repairs for Adrian's apartment, and both promised to be here first thing. With the practicality scheduled, I went to my bedroom and took the pale dress from its garment bag. I ran a hand over the fabric and laughed once, quiet and real, not bitter, with new. I hung it back and chose soft clothes that fit my day, cotton, flats, earrings for myself. Sun slid across the floorboards in long bars, and in that gentle light, I realized the house didn't feel empty. It felt reclaimed. I brewed fresh coffee and wrote in my notebook, "I am not an account to be managed. I am a person to be respected." The words steadied me more than any apology ever had. When text pinged, "Mom, answer please. Call me now. We need to talk," I let them collect like rain on a roof. I closed the notebook, set my mug in the sink, and felt something unclench so deeply inside me that it sounded like a door I hadn't known was there finally opening to air. The locksmith arrived at 8 sharp with a quiet, competent son who carried the toolbox like a ritual object. And while they swapped out the old brass cylinders for new deadbolts, the house seemed to shrug off a weight I hadn't known it wore. Each metallic click sounded like a sentence with a period at the end instead of an unfinished apology. By 9, the security technician was threading cable and syncing small, unblinking eyes to my phone. He showed me how to name each camera: porch, hall, kitchen, so that the map of my home returned to me in tidy labels. I brewed coffee for all of us and stood in the doorway, listening to their normal talk: weather, traffic, a match last night. And I realized how starved I'd been for interactions that didn't circle the drain of someone else's emergency. When they left, I walked the perimeter with my keys jangling in my hand, like proof, tested the chime, and watched the app show my own face at the threshold. There I was, a woman with lines around her mouth and clear eyes, not a confused suspect in her own life. The phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I let it roll to voicemail. A minute later, another number, then another, the hydra of persistence hunting for a soft spot, until Sophia's voice finally arrived through a borrowed line, sweetened to the edge of rot. "Miriam, let's fix this with a special dinner," she proposed, as if the phrase special hadn't already been used to cut me out of a life event like trimming fat from a roast. She suggested we cook at my place, like old times, and I pictured myself slicing onions while the access code to my bank account was coaxed from me between recipes. "How late are you on rent?" I asked instead. A pause opened. I could almost hear her counting the months. "2," she said, "but that's not why." "It is exactly why," I answered, and ended the call. I blocked the number, then the next and the next, until silence fell like fresh snow. At noon, my neighbor, Arlene Bennett, the woman with the terracotta pots and the perpetually escaping cat, knocked with a thermos under her arm. "I heard voices yesterday," she said, lowering hers automatically. "Are you all right?" We sat at my kitchen table, and I told her the truth without embroidery. She listened like grown women do when they have their own catalog of disappointments and rescues. "Happened to my sister," she said, screwing the cap off the thermos. She turned off the faucet, and her son called her cruel. 2 years later, he calls her every Sunday, just to talk. The story slid into me like warm broth. After she left, I wrote down everything for Weber: timestamps of calls, names of installers, the exact phrasing Sophia used, even the color of the folder the lawyer had carried: gray, because detail is a kind of anchor in a storm. I emailed scans of the canceled transfers and a photo of the new lock invoice, then laid down for 20 minutes and practiced an odd exercise the technician had taught me: breathing in for 4, holding for 4, out for 6. It felt childish until the third repetition, when the raggedness under my sternum loosened. At 3 o'clock, my app pinged. Motion on the porch. I opened the feed to see Adrian and Sophia in my camera's crisp rectangle, knocking in polite rhythms, faces tilted toward the lens with wounded dignity. I did not move from the sofa. Instead, I called Weber. "Stay inside," he said. "I'm 5 minutes away, and I'm calling the police now. The temporary notice is filed." The officers arrived ahead of him, hands open, voices level. Through the door, I heard Adrian telling them his mother was confused and endangered, the same script dressed in concern. I opened the door only when Weber stood beside them. He presented the paperwork. The officers explained the boundary, and Sophia's tears appeared on cue. "Family doesn't need warrants," she said to me, and I watched the sentence fall at my feet like a toy someone had outgrown. "Family needs respect," I replied, and closed the door gently as the officers guided them back to the sidewalk. The app showed them lingering by the curb, arguing with the air and each other, then getting into their car and shrinking down the street. After the taillights vanished, I stood in my entryway and let the quiet spread. It wasn't the old quiet, the vigilance that listens for the next request, but a new, generous quiet that made room for my breath. I made tea and took it to the porch, sat in the chair that used to be decorated for their visits and now was just mine, and watched late sun arrange itself across the lawn. A hummingbird stitched from flower to flower like a green needle, indifferent to court papers and hurt feelings. And I thought,
not for the last time. That adulthood is when you discover the shortest word in any language that can save your life. I said it out loud, softly, to hear how it sounded in the open air, and the house set it back in the gentle creak of new locks settling into place.
The next morning began with a list and a steadier pulse. Open a new account at a bank they've never touched, freeze my credit, copy every receipt, prepare a letter to the agencies Weber warned me about, and then do something ordinary for myself that doesn't involve rescuing anyone. I chose the last item first, almost out of defiance, and drove to the salon where Cynthia clipped away an inch of hair that felt like a decade of apologies, painted my nails a soft rose, and asked about my life in a way that did not lead to an invoice. I told her I was editing my story, present tense. When I returned, a woman in a navy blazer stood on my porch with a clipboard and an official badge that glinted like a small verdict. Mrs. Alvarez, I'm with Senior Services. We received a report that you may be at risk. The phrasing was practiced, neutral, as if concern could be poured from a standardized bottle. I breathed once, long and even, and invited her inside while I called Weber on speaker. She read from the report. Abrupt financial changes, isolation from family, installation of excessive security, refusal of medical advice. The words were familiar. Someone had turned my boundaries into symptoms. I led her through my kitchen, pointed to fresh groceries and an updated pill organizer that contained exactly vitamins and aspirin. I showed her the calendar on the wall, inked with lunches, the garden club, a bookshop lecture circled for Friday. I opened my laptop and pulled up bank statements, tax filings, and the confirmations from yesterday's cancellations. Do you live alone? She asked, I scanning my tidy counters. I do, I said, and I manage it. On the speaker, Weber's voice was calm iron. My client is competent and documented. We will provide a copy of an independent evaluation shortly. She softened when she saw the orderliness laid out in receipts and routines. Competence is not a performance, I thought. It's a pattern. I see no reason for intervention, she concluded, handing me a card and an apology I didn't need. After she left, the weight I'd been carrying slipped a little further off my shoulders, and in the space it vacated, I called my sister, Delia, in Chicago. We hadn't truly talked in months. Every old conversation had turned into a ledger of what I'd paid for Adrian, a brag disguised as a bruise. This time I told her the whole truth. Wedding without me, the lawyer at my table, the cameras blinking awake, the police at my curb, and she went quiet in the way people do when grief and relief arrive together. Mary, she said finally, I've heard him at gatherings talk about when mom's gone like a windfall, not a loss. I didn't know how to tell you without breaking your heart. It's already broken, I said, but it's also mending into something stronger. After we hung up, I drove to the cemetery with sunflowers and a bottle of water to scrub the dust from Mateo stone. I told my late husband what I should have said aloud years ago. I am not a benefactor. I am a person. And the breeze lifted through the cypresses like agreement. On the way home, I stopped by a different bank, one where no teller knew Adrian's birthday, and opened a new account with a fresh signature that felt like a boundary line drawn in ink. Back at the house, I drafted a brief for Weber. Timestamps, screenshots, the social worker's card, names of installers, Arlene's note that she'd witnessed the porch scene. I photographed my list because paper can go missing when people feel entitled to your drawers. Then I did the final item. I walked each room at dusk and spoke aloud to the walls like they were witnesses. This is my kitchen, my table, my chair. This is my door and the lock that answers only to me. This is my breath in my body, and I am the one who decides how it is spent. The cameras ticked gently as they shifted in low light. Somewhere down the block, a car idled and moved on. My phone lit with a new unknown number and went dark again. I brewed chamomile, set tomorrow's clothes on a chair,
pressed a clean page into my notebook, and wrote a sentence that rang like a bell. I am not confused. I am finished being. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, thick and self-important, with my name misprinted just enough to sting. Inside, a petition asked the judge to decide that I, Miriam Alvarez, could no longer be trusted with my own life. Adrian and Sophia accused me of cognitive decline, of paranoia evidenced by cameras, of isolating behaviors, of refusing medical advice I never received. I read every line twice and felt not fear first, but clarity. If they would drag me into court, they had finally said the quiet part aloud. They loved access more than they loved me. I called Weber, who sounded unsurprised, and he laid out the steps. We would answer the petition, request an independent capacity evaluation, gather affidavits, and document how my so-called symptoms were boundaries, not breakdown. Then we traced the roots of their claims. At the pharmacy, Mr. Green's ears flushed when he saw the paragraph where he supposedly attested to my erratic prescriptions. Sophia had visited, fretting about my health, and he had signed a generic note confirming I didn't fill regular scripts. Someone turned that into a warning. He typed a correction on the spot and offered to testify. Next came the neighbor. Mr. Dodd stood on his porch with crossed arms and a lawn trimmed to military standards, insisting that normal people didn't add cameras or refuse surprise drop-ins. I told him the cameras were there because people who claimed love had entered my house with a lawyer, and that refusing ambush was sanity, not decline. He scoffed. I left him to his hedges. Weber scheduled my evaluation with Dr. Leela Moore. I arrived early with a notebook, water, and a stubborn determination to answer as myself. Dr. Moore's eyes were warm and precise. She explained the process: memory tasks, attention and planning, judgment scenarios, arithmetic, language, and a conversation about routines, finances, and stress. I recited words, reversed numbers, solved puzzles, sketched a clock, balanced a pretend checkbook, and described the difference between loving a child and sponsoring an adult. Somewhere between the clock face and story recall, my breath deepened. Competence isn't bravado, it's thinking with the lights on. When we finished, she smiled and said my scores exceeded expectation for my age, and that her report would state clearly that I was fully capable of managing my affairs. I thanked her and allowed myself 5 minutes of shaking relief in the parking lot. On the way home, I stopped for printer ink and archival folders because documentation is boring until it becomes armor. At the kitchen table, I assembled a binder: bank confirmations, locksmith invoice, camera installation, the social worker's card, screenshots of calls, text, and porch visits, Mr. Green's letter, notes to Mr. Dodd, calendar pages, and a list of witnesses who could speak to my days. I dated each page and slid it into its sleeve, listening to the soft hiss of plastic like a gate closing. When Sophia called from yet another number, I let it ring. When she texted that love means helping each other, I replied, love is not measured in automatic transfers. She sent a sermon about sacrifice and how families share. I typed back one sentence: sharing is a choice, not a debt. 2 minutes later, Adrian wrote that I would regret forcing him to take legal steps. I set the phone face down and looked at the binder, thick now, heavy with proof, and felt something like devotion. Not to the fight, but to the woman I have become in order to survive it. At dusk, I stepped onto the porch and watched the streets settle. Sprinklers ticking, a bike clattering past, Arlene calling for her Houdini cat. I whispered to the evening, I will not be bullied out of my own life. Inside, the cameras purred, the new locks held, and the binder rested on the table like a patient heart, ready for the next paper storm. I brewed tea, labeled one more divider court, slid blank pages behind it for whatever came next, and felt a calm resolve build like weather, slow, unstoppable, ordinary as rain. Proof that I could choose myself without apology and keep choosing, day after day. No is my shelter. Weber said preparation is mercy for your future self, so we turned my dining room into a small war room. The binder opened like a map, sticky flags marching down its margins, a legal pad for questions I didn't want to forget, and the pitcher of water because nerves are thirsty. He walked me through what would come, the hearing first, then, if needed, testimony and cross, exhibits admitted or excluded, and he asked me to practice telling ordinary truth without embroidery. We role-played. He became their attorney with the kindly, predatory tone, and I answered in plain verbs. When he tried to bait me, "Isn't it true you've become paranoid?" I answered, "It's true I installed cameras after my son entered my home with a lawyer and I hadn't invited either." When he suggested I'd been influenced by new friends, I said, "I am influenced by sleep, fresh air, receipts, and respect." We laughed at that last line, but only a little. Laughter was a spice, not a meal. After he left, I called Delia and asked if she would come. She didn't pause. "I already booked the flight," she said, and I cried, in that surprised, embarrassing way hope makes you weep, fast and grateful. Arlene came by with a casserole and the names of 2 women from her garden club who had seen me at meetings, buying seedlings, asking for compost ratios, mundane observations that, in court, would bloom into proof that I manage my days with curiosity, not confusion. I wrote thank you notes that evening, not because etiquette wins cases, but because gratitude keeps bitterness from salting the soil of your life. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery again, not to ask Mateo for rescue. He did his rescuing when he was alive, but to sit where I'd tell myself the truth. I told him I was afraid of losing Adrian entirely, even if the court sided with me. Afraid of the finality that boundaries sometimes bring. A breeze kept lifting the corner of the page where I'd written my statement, as if the air itself wanted to read it. Back home, I practiced the details that matter. The dates of transfers, the month the air conditioner was repaired, the day the dress went back into its garment bag. The exact phrase Sophia used at my table. Temporary authority to assist, as if assistance were a hand gently taking your throat. Dr. Moore set her report. Intact cognition, strong executive function, capacity unimpaired. Reading it, I felt witnessed in a way that photographs can't manage. Mr. Green printed his corrected letter on heavy paper. He apologized again and told me that clarity is sometimes late, but rarely absent when invited. Even the security technician agreed to be on standby to explain how I'd compared quotes, scheduled an installation, and asked sensible questions about data retention. I slept in clean sheets, the binder on a chair within arm's reach, and woke before dawn to iron a black suit I had not worn since Mateo's memorial. I put on small pearl studs, the kind of earrings that do not ask to be noticed, and made oatmeal because putting something steady in your body is an argument against panic. On the way to Weber's office for our final review, I stopped by a print shop to make 2 complete duplicate binders because redundancy is a love letter to a woman who has learned that papers can vanish when people feel entitled to your drawers. At the office, we sat with his paralegal, who numbered exhibits and clipped them into sets. I initialed every page that had my name. We rehearsed again, shorter this time like dancers marking steps before the curtain. Before I left, Weber looked at me over the neat stacks and said, "Remember, they must prove you cannot manage yourself. You don't have to be perfect. You have to be real." Driving home, I passed the park where a father was teaching a boy to throw a baseball. Patient, delighted each time the ball stayed in the glove. I felt the ache and the balm of that sight. At a red light, I opened my notebook and wrote, "I don't need Adrian to be my son in court for me to be my mother." The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and coffee when we arrived, the kind of ordinary scent that tries to convince you nothing irreversible ever happens inside its walls. Weber and I took seats at the respondents' table, my black suit smoothed across my knees, the binder at my elbow like a heartbeat. Across the aisle, Adrian adjusted a new tie that didn't quite sit right, and Sophia wore sorrow like a tailored dress, her eyes already bright, as if tears were an accessory. Their attorney, silver hair, easier smile than truth, rose first and told the court a story where I was a confused woman lured by influences, where cameras meant paranoia and canceled transfers were a cry for help rather than a boundary. I kept my hands folded and breathed as we practiced. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. He called Sophia, and she stepped into the role as if auditioning. She spoke about a second mother and sudden changes. Let her voice tremble when she described me isolating and dabbed delicately at eyes that went dry between glances at the judge. Weber stood. When, he asked, calm as a metronome, did you last call Miriam without asking for money? The pause felt like a lifted bridge. Nothing crossed. Is it true you married without inviting her? He asked next. We kept it small, she said. And did you tell her you invited only special people? Color rose in her cheeks. The sentence landed between us like a dropped plate, impossible to unhear. Adrian followed, and hearing my son swear to tell the truth while preparing to sand it down felt like swallowing ice. He said words like erratic and influenced and insisted he was terrified for his mother. And when Weber asked how much money he had received in 3 years, he said he couldn't recall. Would $33,400 refresh your memory? Weber asked, placing the exhibit on the rail. My son cleared his throat and studied the ceiling. Next came the neighbor, Mr. Dodd, who declared that normal people don't install cameras or turn away surprise visits. Under cross, he admitted he had never actually spoken to me about any concern and that his observations came from across a trimmed hedge. Their doctor suggested my refusal to submit to an unsolicited psychiatric interview was proof of decline. Weber slid Dr. Moore's report into the light like a sunrise, and the record noted that my cognition and judgment were intact. Then it was our turn. Mr. Green, my pharmacist, testified first, mortified but firm, as he explained how a generic confirmation had been bent into a warning. The corrected letter entered the file with a satisfying stamp. The locksmith described my precise instructions and comparison of lock grades. The technician explained how I weighed storage policies and police response times before purchasing cameras. Arlene spoke about bookshop lectures and garden club meetings and the day I taught her sister to prune roses. Tiny proofs that daily life had rhythm, not rupture. Dr. Moore took the stand and, with clear, unfussy sentences, described my test results. Memory solid, executive function strong, capacity unimpaired. Finally, I walked the few steps to the witness chair, placed my palm on cool wood, and told the truth in the simple order of events. A wedding I learned about after it happened, the phrase special people, the years of transfers and groceries and emergencies that always arrived just before my own plans, the afternoon a lawyer sifted my papers at my table, the decision to change locks and reclaim my name from their signatures. Their attorney tried to rattle me with the old script, influenced, paranoid, confused, and I answered as myself. I am influenced by rest and receipts. I installed cameras because people who said they loved me entered my home uninvited. I am confused only by the idea that love must be financed to count. When I stepped down, the room felt oddly larger. The judge asked a few careful questions, face unreadable, then announced a recess to review the exhibits and reports. As we filed out into the corridor's dull hum, I caught Adrian's eyes for a heartbeat. Something like regret flickered there, Or maybe only calculation? I couldn't tell anymore, and for the first time since this began, I understood I didn't need to. I sat on the bench, laid my hand on the binder, and felt the steadiness we built rise through my bones like a tide coming in right on time.
Judge Miller returned with a stack of papers and a face that gave nothing away until he began to read, and then every sentence restored a small piece of me. Petition denied, capacity intact, rights affirmed, pattern of financial motivation noted. The words were dry on the page and wet in my eyes, because bureaucracy, when it chooses correctly, can feel like grace. I thanked the court, squeezed Weber's hand, and walked past Adrian and Sophia without searching their faces for anything to take home. Whatever flickered there no longer needed to guide my next step. Outside, the air smelled like warm concrete and early lunch, and I stood on the courthouse steps with Delia and Arlene and Weber and let relief move through me like weather, windy, startling, gone and back again, until it settled into something usable, calm resolve. The practical aftermath moved quickly. Weber filed for a permanent no-contact order regarding surprise visits. I closed the last account that linked to old habits. I listed the house and watched strangers stroll through rooms that had held both my generosity and my exhaustion. When the sale closed, I boxed the things that felt like mine: Mateo's watch, my brushes, the good skillet, and the slim binder that had guarded my life, and left behind anything that felt like duty disguised as furniture. I rented a bright apartment near the park, where the afternoons are all windows and the nights are quiet enough for sleep. I bought a secondhand easel and set it by the light, and the first thing I painted was not a verdict or a memory, but a bowl of clementines, round and ordinary and fully mine. I donated a portion of the proceeds to a nonprofit that trains bank tellers and pharmacists to spot elder coercion. I sent Mr. Green a thank you note and a bag of coffee, because contrition deserves encouragement. Deli and I took a modest train loop through cities we used to name like fairy tales: Prague, Vienna, Salzburg, and we traveled the way two practical sisters travel: early lunches, good shoes, museums until our feet asked for mercy, laughter that sounded like it belonged to us. Back home, I joined Arlene's garden club and the Thursday volunteers who pack groceries for seniors who ask for help without shame. I learned the names of 3 neighbors' dogs and the bus line that gets me to the museum on free days. I replaced my old habit of refreshing my banking app with the slower ritual of choosing a new library book. Some evenings I sit on the balcony with tea and a knit shawl and watch the small theater of the street: couples arguing kindly, skateboards whispering over concrete, and a woman balancing a bakery box like a secret. And I practice being a citizen of my own life instead of a donor to someone else's. Adrian has not called me directly. A mutual cousin relayed that he and Sophia moved to a smaller place and that Sophia is working the morning shift at a clinic. I don't root for their failure. I root for their adulthood. If they arrive at it, perhaps a real apology will one day find its shape. But my peace cannot be collateral for a possibility. I still wake some nights with the echo of that phrase, special people, ringing in my head, and I answer it with 2 others that saved me: not anymore, and no. On the anniversary of the ruling, I walked to the cemetery with sunflowers and told Mateo what I wish I'd learned sooner: that love given freely must be received freely, that help without respect curdles into harm, that boundaries are not barricades, but doors you learn to lock and unlock with your own key. I came home, cooked a simple dinner, and ate at my small table with the window cracked to let in the scent of rain. I thought of the woman I was: tired, generous beyond wisdom, bargaining for belonging with transfers and casseroles, and I blessed her for surviving long enough to choose differently. My name is Miriam Alvarez. I am 72 and fluent in firsts again. First quiet morning without vigilance. First train trip bought for joy. First painting signed only for me. First year in which my greatest act of care was choosing myself and watching the world keep turning. If I am asked what changed, I answer plainly: nothing and everything. I stopped trying to purchase love, and in the empty space where the invoices used to be, a life finally fit.